Standing is usually the order. Okay.
Yeah. Josh,
I get tired, I'll sit.
maybe close the view we have of the speakers so we can see the entire slide.
I assume people online can hear me okay, hopefully. Shout out if you can't hear me, all right. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the clock. I think I have 40 minutes, at least some time for discussion, right? Thank you. Make it tidy.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay. So I am pleased to present to you work with collaborators Florencia Devoto, who's based in Morocco, Emanuela Galasso, a colleague of mine in the research group, and Stephanie Broadman, who is a social protection operational colleague in the World Bank out of our HQ office. And this is work from a field experiment in Djibouti done in collaboration with the government of Djibouti. So the focus of this paper is a public works intervention that was introduced in Djibouti. And I want to kind of first start by taking a step back and asking or raising a few points about public works as a social policy lever in low and middle income countries. There is a very large literature around public works, and it talks about a range of different aspects of public work design and implications of public works. And which is also called workfare in some contexts, but I'll say public works throughout the talk. This includes lengthy discussions about setting the wage rate to elicit a public works as a self-targeted type of social policy. The potential general equilibrium effects. We've seen a lot of recent papers on the India and Rega, the 100-day work guarantee and how it affects local economies, including like increasing wage rates for daily laborers in rural settings. The role of public works, particularly as a counter-cyclical social policy at times of high unemployment. How public works can affect intra-household patterns and time allocation, particularly between women and men. To what extent are they cost effective compared to other poverty alleviation programs? I'll touch on that at the very end of my conclusion slide. Potentially public works as a lever for the school to work transition for youth, and whether or not there are productive effects from public works programs, like are skills passed on to individuals who participate in them?
Do you define public works? Is it any work that's funded partly by the government, or is it people working for government agencies?
It's the former. It's actually a very interesting point. I don't have a definition of public works in my slides. These are programs that are designed to give a usually manual labor opportunity to individuals for on a temporary basis for the production of some form of infrastructure or some type of community activity. So they're not civil servants, like they're not like what we call public employment. So if you were to calculate the number of public employees, you would not count beneficiaries of a public works program. They are paid for by the government. And I'll talk a bit about what they do in this context, but sometimes it's refurbishing a rural road, particularly an unpaved road. It could be refurbishing schools and health centers, clearing out small earth dams that get like silt built up in them as a means of irrigation systems, say in northern Ghana, that's one. More recently, we've seen them used as a response to climate mitigation and adaptation, so planting trees, maintaining mangrove forests, say in places like Fiji. And they're because they're self-targeted and they're usually low wage rate, they're attracting like low skilled, uneducated part of the labor force into a work opportunity.
So it's mostly infrastructure. There is no service activities.
They're not becoming teachers. It's not like Teach for America or anything like that. They're not becoming community health workers. So they're not replacing that kind of cadre of skilled labor in the public service delivery side. More recently, we've been there's been some discussion about to what extent do these programs target women. And I won't show you numbers on this, but in fact, a lot of public works programs, fairly large portion of the beneficiaries turn out to be women, either unintentionally or intentionally. So what are the conditions under which you want to target a woman with a public works opportunity? There's an equity argument that's some small portion of what I'll talk about today, recognizing the high barriers of entry into the labor market for women. Many programs do, at least ones supported by the World Bank, will have gender quotas in place. They're not necessarily binding though, because these programs often end up oversubscribed. A second argument is minimizing foregone earnings, because men earn more than women. By targeting women, the foregone earnings from the alternative employment opportunity will be lower for the household. And thirdly, and here I think there's a lot less compelling evidence, although we talk about it a lot. If women and men within a household spend money differently, then giving the money directly to the woman may affect the consumption pattern of the household differently than if the income were to go to the man. Can talk about that at length, but there is not much evidence to support the notion that men for example, spend less money on children than women, despite the fact that we hear that talked about a lot in development. I wrote a blog on that, so you can go look at that on other people's evidence on that. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the program that we're going to look at today. So Djibouti is mostly urban because the rural parts are like desert and not kind of very hard to have sustainable kind of traditional rural livelihoods, as you would see in other parts of, say, sub-Saharan Africa. Djibouti also, for what it's worth, in the World Bank lingo, is not part of the Africa region. It's actually Middle East, North Africa region in World Bank lingo. Because a lot of the way the economy is shaped. It's a very small state. It has important geopolitical location. A lot of labor opportunities are tied to the port and military and others sort of directly linked to government engagement, and a lot of food, maybe most foods, imported. So I will say this, Djibouti is a specific kind of place. I mean, every place is specific. Some places maybe are more specific than others, and this is a very specific place, she says vaguely. Among ways it's not different than a lot of low-income countries, very low levels of labor force participation, very low levels of literacy with large gender gaps in literacy rates, very poor human development outcomes for children, both in health and schooling. Going back to the gender inequalities, Djibouti as a country has slightly higher rates of gender unequal laws. You can look at the World Bank's Women, Business, and the Law to track laws and regulation that imply gender inequalities. Women report low levels of physical mobility. Here we have survey data. 50% of women have to ask permission to visit family and friends who are outside of their neighborhood. Now, Djibouti, I want to go back to this point about low female labor force participation. This number, the very low levels of labor force participation, doesn't look like the rest of certainly sub-Saharan Africa has very high rates of female labor force participation. And this is, a very, let's say it's consistent with the World Bank putting Djibouti with our Middle East, North Africa region, where we see very, very low levels of labor force participation. And just to give you a sense of how low, I pulled this from a data story we have on the World Bank's Gender Data Portal. Each of the colors are different regions of the world, and the dots are different countries within the region. Mapped, there's a time dimension to this, so we have different data points. Actually, the dots, I think, are the region averages. I apologize, they're not country level. But they moved from 1990 up to 2019 by income level. And what I want to point out two things on this figure. I love this figure. I didn't used to have this in this presentation, but I wanted to just make a pitch on one small gender inequality idea here. First, well, probably most people in this room might already know, labor force participation is very low in the Middle East and North Africa. It's very low. Second lowest place in the world, South Asia, very low. The other dimension I want to point out is a time dimension. 1990, 2019, staying flat. So there is, and these countries are getting wealthier, okay? The average of the South Asia country average in GDP per capita is going up. So this notion that there's a U shape to development and female labor force participation, which is commonly discussed when we talk about women and women's work in developing countries, is, my humble opinion, an artifact of piling cross-sectional data on top of each other. When you look within region, as Stefan Clausen has very vocally said over the years, he would say this, when you look within region, you don't see a U shape. So what does development bring? I'm telling you, there's not a lot of evidence that brings women into the labor market, at least in this, maybe 30-year time span. Certainly in the US, over 100 years, you see something different. So I think this is important when we think about what's going to bring women into the labor market and whether or not it's development, at least in the short run, we're not seeing it anywhere with our cross-sectional data after we look within region. So
in an agricultural society, the women not in the labor market may or may not be working in some sense. Here, this is an urban society. What are the women who are not in the labor market doing with their time?
in Djibouti, they're taking care of their kids, and we didn't do time detailed. We did some. I'll show you some time use data, but they're
in their house. They're in their residential compound,
neighborhoods.
spending time with their.
Yeah, they're in their neighborhood. They're in their, preparing food, taking care of children. And then the question becomes, if you offer them public works, thank you for the lead in, will they take it up? Why aren't they working? And it's part of the reason they're not working, that they don't have an opportunity or these other things in the social norms realm that keep them from working more.
Muslim country.
Yes. Yeah. But, look at, talk about, that's a whole other presentation maybe that I have not prepared. Middle East and North Africa are predominantly Muslim countries, but you go to a place like Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world, and you won't see nearly these low levels of female labor force participation. You'll see gender gaps in labor force participation, but anyway, there are lots of things happening in these economies. These economies also have very distorted public sectors and very stilted private sectors. So one of the stories in the Middle East and North Africa is the too low labor demand in the private sector because of the way the public sector functions. Arab Spring issues with queuing for public sector jobs and all this stuff. Yeah. See, it just goes off in a million directions. Okay, so the intervention. There was a spike in food prices. Remember, it's all imported. They also had a drought, which is going to affect the whole region, which affects the importation as well as what little food they grow. Big spike in food prices. And there was discussion in the government about reforming the way they design their social protection system. And there was the introduction of the idea of a short-term public works program, which offered women 50 days of, offer people 50 days of part-time work, 4 hours a day, 4 to 5 hours with breaks, street cleaning, small artisanal projects, repairing some very rudimentary local infrastructure. The daily wage rate in Djibouti francs is about 60%, 80% of the minimum wage. Minimum wage here is not binding because it's too small of a private sector. But it hits around the 25th to 40th percentile of private sector wages, which could be formal and informal. This is not all formal work. And the program was to operate only in Djibouti city. It's not an employment guarantee, so it's not a year-on-year commitment. Every year you get 50 days, like in India with NREGA. So in partnership with the World Bank, the government decided to focus explicitly on women and women with young children. The program would, if you enrolled in the program, you would get a bank account opened in the name of the beneficiary. You would be allowed to delegate the work opportunity to another person. Originally, it was supposed to be household members, but they kind of slipped on that. So you could let your husband do the job, or a neighbor or a sister that lived next door. All the work was in the community, very close to where women live. And importantly, it was linked to a nutrition program. So they had a pre-existing nutrition counseling program for women with small children, for pregnant women and women with small children, that offered nutritional counseling and referral to health services. So by offering them this income opportunity, they were giving these women extra income to be able to put into action the advice they were getting on nutrition from the nutritional program. Now, this is the right time to say this. So I talked to Michelle before this talk, and I'm like, there's some things I could say that might be a little off the cuff here. You won't find them in the paper. I'm just going to say that. I didn't work on the original design of this study. I came on board later. I like to say I came on board as the last mile author. when the co-authors had sort of like, couldn't quite bring the paper, you kind of get stuck on a paper and you need someone with fresh eyes. So when I read the first kind of partial draft of this paper, my thought was, why in the world would you give a woman with a 2-year-old a public works opportunity? I mean, it is kind of crazy. It feels like really like weird. These are women who are taking care of 2-year-olds. And I think part of that decision reflects the timing of this, because this was over 10 years ago when I think we were thinking differently about children's development, and women and husbands and the care economy. It's also I think in this particular setting, there was a notion that there are other members of the household and or neighbors who can take care of kids, because the small children were not expected, they're not supposed to be at the public works site. In fact, women in their 3rd trimester were not allowed to participate in the public works for health reasons. But what I will say is that and I've learned this working at the World Bank, when you're working with a government, like the government of Djibouti, and you're talking to the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance, what you think is the right thing to do and what they want to do for a variety of reasons may not converge. So I will say, again, it seems crazy to offer a woman with a very small child a public works opportunity. It's almost a burden to her in some sense. And we'll talk about the second shift idea. But these social policy is a negotiation, right, on all parts. And this is what they came up with in 2012. So then the big questions, sorry.
So the delegation means that really anybody else could do it potentially. It's just that.
Yeah, if the woman said, I'm not going to take it, my friend Mary, she wants to do it. And we'll talk about delegation, because we do see some women delegating. Yeah.
But she really has control over the bank account, basically. Is that clear?
No, the payment would still go to the person who did the work, but then they came up with like these anecdotally informal agreements about like the money sharing bit. But there's no enforcement on that. Okay, so there are a few questions that when Emanuela and Stephanie and Florencia were designing this that were really like first and foremost. Number one, will women in this setting take up the public works opportunity? Because there are a lot of reasons why women aren't working in this setting that don't have to do only with labor demand. Or would they delegate? Secondly, if they take up the program, will we be able to see any changes in behavior in the household in terms of other income opportunities? Will a husband work less because the woman's taking up this work? Will they consume different foods? Do we see any impact on like nutritional behaviors for small children, which the program was intended to affect? And third, and this is where the end line comes into play, could this be a kind of gateway job opportunity? And the idea here is that for women who are in settings where very few women work, where they have never worked, and they can't, the idea, the concept of it is very elusive and foreign, if you will exposure to this opportunity increase their interest in working, which could include and would likely mean largely informal self-employment activities like selling prepared food on the street. So this idea of a gateway job, would public works serve as a gateway job? The design, it's a staggered rollout. So all the treatment, these nutritional groups were all offered the program at some point in time. They don't know when they'll get it. They don't really know about it until it comes to their group in their neighborhood. So the design impact evaluation plays off the timing of the treatment. I won't bore you with this too much, but you'll just see the staggered nature of treatment control. And surveys were done at midline during the public works as it's happening, and then an end line about 9 months after the end of the public works. Okay, so I want to talk about the surveys a little bit. Parts of the questionnaires are administered separately to husbands and wives, the women and men. Almost all of the women co-reside with the husband. In the midterm survey we had, and the end line, we have what are called employment diaries. They're not true diaries. They're not like a proper type of diary, but they are over the course of 3 weeks, every day of the week recall on work. So we think we're capturing a pretty like accurate depiction of work as opposed to say a singular 7-day recall question. The questionnaire included questions about transfers within the household, the physical giving of cash to different members of the household. I'll talk about that. Time use, which I'll use for the caregiving activities information, classic set of income expenditures, some psychosocial well-being measures, and some inter-household decision-making, kind of a la DHS. Rest in peace. No, it's gonna survive, it's gonna survive. We had baseline, midline, and end-line surveys. Okay, so there are different ways to control for the stratification, the location of the nutrition sessions, session groupings, types. We do a bunch of checks that it doesn't matter how we address stratification. I think I have, the next slide shows you one of our balance set of coefficients that we look at for balance. We do find some imbalance, so we've done it with and without baseline controls. Results are robust. I do want to, now this I want to give a little bit of shout out. Only late in the game do we do multiple hypothesis testing. What you'll see in our paper, which you won't see in the slides today, is for all of our outcomes, like employment, women's employment, we have like 8 different measures. Did you do this kind of work, that kind of work? Some of them are explicitly linked, because if you did one, you didn't do the other, and others are like hours. So but they're all implicitly linked or explicitly linked. And we were not originally doing multiple hypothesis testing controls. So we were doing individual outcome controls. We've since revised the paper for the multiple hypothesis testing, and it's really important for this paper because in all of our outcome categories, we have multiple measures of the same class of outcome. It doesn't change any of the main findings, but my caveat is that the figures in this paper, the confidence intervals haven't been corrected for the multiple hypothesis testing. And my other like little side note, the state of command we use for our multiple hypothesis testing is not spitting out the confidence intervals. So now we've got to figure that out, which is why I didn't have time like 2 days ago to update the figures. But in all the figures where you see the figures that I show you to make the story around what impacts we're finding, those results hold even with the multiple hypothesis testing. It's like a long side note. Okay, so this is not a true baseline table because you don't see the controls, just the averages to give you a picture of the setting. These are large households, a lot of children in them. We have the average size is about 7 members. There are about 3 members, over 15. As I said, most of these are coupled households. So the older members that aren't in the couple are going to be an older child, maybe a sibling, in some cases a grandparent. A large share of our beneficiary women have no schooling at all, 82%. Most of them at baseline were not employed. A small number of them were self-employed, selling prepared foods or trading like non-prepared foods like vegetables in the street. A few were doing day work activities, and almost no one was kind of traditional salaried work. Right, so yeah, there's money. Okay, I'll just say almost a third of the households report having are concerned about not having enough food. We have a number of food security measures. These are very food insecure households, so reflecting, I think, a lot of the statistics from these households and what we know about Djibouti.
Susan,
All right,
when you
yeah.
talk about transfers, are you talking about cash transfers?
Yes, yeah, so not in kind, all cash. So result number 1, take-up was really high. 92% of beneficiary women, either they took up the program, 71% of them take it up themselves. The rest of them delegate to another person. Sometimes it's a household member, and sometimes it's not a household member. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Most of the delegation.
So when the program goes to the households, they're speaking with the husband and they're asking.
They do it through the nutrition sessions.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're not doing it at the household, they're doing it at the nutrition session. So the husbands aren't present when they're offered the
So there's a
program.
separate nutrition session and the women
Yeah.
are going to that.
Yeah, so
Okay.
all of these women, here a few, they have very low schooling. I showed you that. I showed you household size. They all have young children. Some of them are pregnant. And they're all attending these community-based nutrition sessions, which also do health referrals. And all of the like allocation of the program was through nutrition session. So this issue of like going to a household and offering a husband or a wife an opportunity and having them negotiate is not happening here, which doesn't mean the wives don't go back and talk to their husbands, right? But that discussion is sort of in the wife's hand decide on. Most of the delegation, the roughly 29% of delegation, well, it's less than 29%, it's like 20%, is to other females, not to the husband. I have like in Ghana where there are public works and there's a fairly like large share of women who participate. During the dry season in Ghana, it's a sidebar. When I've asked the women there, why are you doing this instead of your husband? Because the husbands don't have work opportunities there either. They basically say, husband kind of doesn't want to bother with it because he knows the wife is going to go ahead and do it. Like he kind of like sort of sits under the tree, lets her go off and spend a day like desilting a small earth dam and raising the money they need to buy extra food during the dry season. So I can't I mean, I can speculate about why the wife is delegating to other women. But the fact that like, I mean, it could be that men don't want to do this kind of work, or they assume that their wife will do it and therefore they sort of don't have to deal with it. It's not very glamorous work by any stretch. And yeah,
Sorry, is it explained to the respondents as a gender
no,
targeted program?
no.
Okay, so it's just a.
It's just like, we have this work opportunity. Do you want it? Or you can give it to someone else in your household. It would be about 50 days, about 4 hours a day. You'll get a break. This is what you'll be paid. And it'll be in your community. A few other things about the program, and I feel like in the public works econ literature, the details around the features of public works are often kind of overshadowed. So you have to, you won't know as much about were there scheduled breaks? How close is the public works site to where people live? And are the breaks allowing women to go home and breastfeed if they need to? That kind of thing. All those things were happening here because there was a recognition that these are women with very small children. And in fact, when you look at NREGA, for example, in India, they have various rules about adapting the start time of public works for women and the end time for women who need to cook in the morning and the evenings for their family, about the breaks that they give for women, in addition to the quotas that NREGA has. But you have to kind of dig through the program literature because that is not often reflected in the papers that write about the impact of NREGA on women's work. And these things matter, particularly start and end times, I think matter. Anecdotally, they matter a lot. The cooking, right? When the cooking happens and how long the cooking takes. Okay, so number one. Okay. Number one, women do take up the program in a place where women mostly don't work. And they don't know other women who worked. And number two, there's a labor supply response. I just told you they take up the program. They work all 50 days. This is women and households, women in households that were offered the program. So it's treatment on the treated. It's intent to treat, and husbands, midline, big increase in the fraction who've worked. Again, it's not going to be 100% because not all women take up the program, right? Second, at end line, we see no change in labor force participation rates by end line. So after the program has ended, sort of right back where we started. Yep.
Is this labor supply response like ever worked in one of those 50 days or like?
No, it's just in the midterm, the midline, which is a 3-week recall every day of the week. It's 3 1-week per day recalls. Did you do any work? And, some very small fraction of this is the self-employment we saw before. But we do observe that the small fraction who were self-employed shift from self-employment to public work. So they don't stack it on top of their self-employment. Right. But still, some of these women are doing the day laborer work that we measured, but it's like 3%. Yeah. Okay. So at midline, almost universal take up of the program, 55% increase in women's employment rate. After accounting for, the incomplete take up, delegation, and the limited crowding out of self-employment. That's why we get to 55%, not like 90%. Other members, labor supply, husbands, as well as other adults in the household, I didn't show you, unaffected. Okay, so this is time use information. Sorry, the title. Oh, yeah, I can hit the OK button. Like that. So at midline, women who get the program report a lot less time in chores, and they're reporting more time in work, thankfully, right? Because you want that to be consistent. But they are pulling back on chores. So, we kind of make the conclusion, we're not seeing the second shift effect happening during the duration of public works. And they are reallocating their time caring for their youngest child. And we're seeing that time being picked up not by the adult men in the household, but by neighbors, older siblings in the household, and other adult women. So reduced chores, a bit of reduced personal care hours too. Okay. Now, this is very consistent with the lack of institutional care opportunities, informal or otherwise, in Djibouti. Also, I should mention the public work sites did not have on-site childcare, which some public work sites do offer. There's this interesting question, like even if the program had gone for 100 days or two, or even if women wanted to stay in the labor force, is this reallocation of childcare, this temporary reallocation during the course of public work, sort of sustainable to make it possible for women to keep working in the labor force? And here I think we've been talking about this with colleagues that I work with. There's a lot of talk in the World Bank about how do we increase women's labor opportunities, but if you don't think about the care economy, even if you can do it temporarily, it's not clear you can do it in perpetuity, because in settings like this where you don't have institutional care or early childhood education, preschool, and other, what will become, who is going to watch the kids? We do find evidence that the income stays under control of the women. So this is women's reports on income, and here on this table we looked at these declared measures of transferring, physically giving other members of the household money. And I want to note that there is some increase in women reporting giving money to the husband if she was offered the public works program, but it's very small and modest. And at baseline, we see very low levels of this happening because women don't have a lot of income. But even when they get the income, they tend to keep the income.
And the husband give money to women, is that?
Yeah, okay. So thank you for mentioning this. So we find this at baseline. This is a very large share of husband's income. The men report giving it to their wife. And the study wasn't designed to look at this, but what we think is happening is the wives purchase food and do all the cooking and other forms of like consumption, non-food consumption. And these are households that are living on the margin, so to speak. Okay, so so we don't see a compensation in the household. We also find that the bank account isn't utilized beyond once the money lands in the bank account, the women take all of it out. So it doesn't look in the short run like the bank account is opening up some other type of financial services used by women. That's consistent with other public works. In Ghana, for example, people take the full amount out, even when they're paid for the cash transfer program into a bank account, they take the full amount out. They don't use the bank account as a means of savings. Again, reflecting how poor the households are, could also be reflecting issues with financial literacy or trust in these institutions, but the money comes straight out. And I want to mention this because, there is this notion that giving people a bank account is partly a pathway to other use of financial services. But for this population, it doesn't appear to be the case.
That 16% foregone income from self-employment, is any of that made up by husband taking over whatever that self-employment was or others, or is that just a dead loss?
I don't think so, but I would have to look more into that. I doubt it, but that's just my instinct.
That's a pretty big hit on the 30% increase.
Yeah.
If it's only half, actually, I don't know if I'm reading that.
Yeah,
That's what it says.
Double check that the way we're presenting that it's interpreted correctly. There are not that many women in self-employment, but they are moving out of it when the public works comes into play. Now, it could be that they, over time, make that up depending on like the nature of how they're doing their self-employed activity. I kind of doubt it, but Just a hunch, because
This is 30% increase for among households that take this program up, and it's 16% decline among households that have self-employment.
It's-
It's not that on average, all households have 30% increase and 16% decrease.
it's
right?
30%, I need to double check, it's 30% intent to treat. So it's not adjusted for the lower than 100% take-up rate.
Okay, and the
So it'd be
16%.
higher if you did that. And the 16%, see, I should know this because I have to check. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think this is
Yeah.
like a bad slide, but I want to double check that I characterized 16% correctly, so I'm not gonna say anything. Okay, we have measures of decision-making. We don't see changes there. We do see the money go to food expenditure per capita. Some evidence it's directed towards food diversity, child food diversity indicators, which is consistent with the nutrition programs. This table kind of shows you why you need multiple hypothesis testing, right? These are a lot of this is the full set of our food diversity indicators, and we had another set of household food security measures. But you see, like, I think the evidence here is a little bit weak because it's kind of springing up here and there. The first set of columns are the midline, and the second set are the end line. We do find heterogeneity, I need to wrap it up, which basically says there are some groups of beneficiaries that benefited more. And we have a variety of cuts on the heterogeneity analysis, but the variation the difference between the low response groups and the high response groups can be pretty high, on the order of 0.3 on the treatment effect. So then the question is, well, who are these high response beneficiaries? What are the characteristics associated with high response? And a couple of the characteristics I want to point out are the women who were not employed at baseline had a bigger response, lower foregone earnings, and women who had higher index of mobility at baseline had a bigger response because they're sort of able to go out and do the work in the neighborhood. Okay, takeaways. Oh, yeah,
Did
hi.
you look at the age of the children?
Exactly.
No, but they're all very young. We could look at the further composition measures, especially the presence of like older children in the household.
Yeah.
Older girls in particular. So women they're willing to do this opportunity when offered. We see this big fade out. We think, can't explicitly show this, but we think a lot of the high take-up was the catering of the program to the special needs of this particular set of women. We do see that some dimensions of agency mediate the impact. I talked about the mobility index at baseline. In terms of the overarching goal of this program, which was nutrition for children, really weak effects, if any, of a short-term intervention. Now, here are a few additional notes. One is, something like in Rega in India, for those of you who know it, is an employment guarantee. Every year, in theory, you get 100 days of work that you have the opportunity to decide with some degree of flexibility when and where within the year. And that's not what this program was. It's like a one-off offer. So something that's a regular offer for women might change their behavior. It may introduce them to enter the labor market after and then kind of go back to public works and in and out and in and out. This is a setting where is a severe lack of outside opportunities. It's also a very stagnant setting in terms of self-employment opportunities, unlike, say, a place like Nairobi, where women can pick up self-employment pretty easily, and we see high rates of self-employment. The interesting question, I think, for this paper is why not just give cash, right? And here I want to reflect on both the year in which this was done, 2012. I think there's been a lot of evolution in thinking about cash in for governments in low-income countries. Much more of a willingness to do it and a change in mindset around lazy beneficiaries and temptation good spending. So, if in this day and age, I think it would have just been a cash program is my hunch. That being said, we still see a lot of countries who want to do public works, and we still see kind of a lot of public social policy spending in public works. We don't measure whether or not the program changes attitudes people have about women's work, and we know from other studies that attitudes about women's work among women and men can influence the extent to which women work. So it's possible it could change that outcome. And of course, what I said earlier is interventions designed to increase women's work will depend on the caregiving opportunities that come with that intervention. At least if women have children, in the household. That's it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So you mentioned the cash. That was an interesting question. I mean, one possibility is that the labor actually accomplished something useful. Like, is there any evidence about that? I mean, did it?
Yeah, and I should edit that slide to like acknowledge that cash, that public works produce something,
Mhm.
right? I don't know about others, maybe others can say, I've seen very little that actually tries to value the infrastructure that public works produces. We usually talk about it, it's in every kind of justification, public works is the value of this, whatever the activity is, but I haven't seen much that like says anything about, although if someone wants a research topic, you could certainly look into that. This type of public works, not so much, because it's like street cleaning, it's not like refurbish a feeder road from the village to the main road, right? That's where you could actually look over time, like our communities who got road refurbishment or the tree planting I mentioned, or the small earth dam work. Like that could have real effects on productive activities in the community.
Isn't it unlikely that women are doing that kind of work?
Oh, not in sub-Saharan Africa. They are very much involved in that kind of work. Fixing, tamping down the roads, it's all manual, right? The other question is why not just bring hard equipment, but it's hard to get it to the remote locations. And the point is to give income to people, but they're doing a lot of that work. Hi.
Kathleen, good to see you.
Good to
Thank
see you
you.
too.
Great. I just, with regard to the last thing, and partly it's self-targeting, right? That's the reason why some people will choose it. So it's going to be a lot less expensive. But whether it targets right people is another question. But I'm interested in a different question, whether in your surveys or in qualitative work, whether you gathered information on what the women said the extra cash was being spent on. So you gave us information about whether there are transfers between husband and wife, but did they say that they were actually increasing food expenditures? You said you had expenditure data, or were they saving for some kind of a durable because they knew that this was time delimited?
Yeah, I'll go back. I don't think there was no proper qualitative work that accompanied the survey, sadly. Michelle, feel your eyes burrowing into me, but yeah. In hindsight, I think that, well, I see a very high value to doing qualitative work linked to this kind of work.
So like when you presented these results to the government, like they feel encouraged, like was this policy that they would like to take forward? Like how do they view this? Because this is
It's funny. I know they've had an expansion of their social protection system in Djibouti. But I should go back and look because I wasn't there in like 2015 when the initial round of results came in. I think that this program, this is my just personal reflection. It's a very niche way to think about public works. It's a nice way to study the intersection of like caregiving responsibilities and social norms and women's work. But in terms of expanding a public works opportunity, I think they would quickly like move away from these bespoke nutrition groups and do a more traditional type of public works like you have in Ethiopia or in India or in Ghana. But I should go back and look and see what the latest design is. Tricky question.
So I like when you began the talk, you said this is a very strange program that you wouldn't have designed because of the contradiction between what women with young children would normally do. The other thing that strikes me is this is a society where there's no, women are not working, women are in the household. So you're actually doing something very foreign to the society. You're having women do something they've never done in a role that has never occurred. Could you just comment on that as a kind of, I mean, the government isn't in favor of changing what women do, presumably. And the society is kind of united on this front of women staying at home, and, or is there some kind of pent up demand? Or is this kind of a very strange program? Like, it sounds to me like you're doing something that's completely foreign to this culture, and you're saying, hey, do you want to play basketball or what?
So I, okay, I'm gonna sort of ruminate on that. This is the government program. Like, okay. It's true that my operational colleagues heavily influence what they kind of, it's a discussion, like this is government's money spent on a government program. And
Their own money.
their
not
own
from-
money. Well, it may have been, it's financed by the World Bank, but the World Bank doesn't tell a government how to spend its money. It's like a dance, right? You sit at the table, you decide, and it's their money to spend the way they want. To what extent that's actually true is a function of personalities of the people literally sitting at the table, not anyone in Washington or some grand schemer on the 13th floor of the main building of the bank. But what I've seen is there are, okay, I'm gonna guess with regard to Djibouti, and I'm gonna make a general comment what I've seen, little I've seen. This was, I suspect that in Djibouti, there's a notion that if you want to improve children's care, it's going to be the moms who are going to really move the needle. It's that old story about women buying the food and they care for the kids, and therefore you want the money to go straight to the women and not through the men, because they'll spend it all on cat, which they might spend a lot of it on cat. They spend a lot of their money on cats, right? What I've observed, not in Djibouti, but in other countries, is particularly when you go to nutrition or the Ministry of Social Welfare generally, or the Ministry of Women and Children, is you'll find people in there who don't think maybe the way the average kind of what looks like the way you think how people think given the cultural norms in the country. So there are people in government who are, I don't know if you'd call that more progressive, but are willing to do things that are kind of outside the norm for the country, particularly in these type of ministries, the ones that run nutritional programs for children, social welfare, social protection, as opposed to the Ministry of Finance, which would be the macro guys. So, why did this exist in a country that's extremely, in some sense, not conservative, but has very low levels of labor force participation? I think it's partly a function of the type of people in the line ministries that were making the call on the program. Just a guess. I wasn't there.
So I don't know very much about this literature, but I wonder if you could just help me by putting these results in context of the larger picture. So public works programs that go to men in these countries, what's the sort of success rate in money going to child development? And secondly, what is the success rate in boosting them to other kinds of career job opportunities? So is this typical of public works studies, or is this an anomaly having to do with women in particular?
Yeah. The first one, there's not a lot of, I haven't seen a lot of compelling evidence that if you give a man an income opportunity over a woman in sort of a causal way, that it has a differential effect on children. And the few studies that exist show it doesn't matter much. In fact, in one study in Burkina Faso, when you gave it to the fathers, they spent more on children than when you give the money to the mothers. There is this, at least in development econ, there's been this long-standing statement about giving income to mothers, they spend more on children. And as I trace that back to a few non-causal studies that have kind of other things going on that would explain that incorrect observation, I think. So I don't think there's much evidence that giving income to men, it means a differential impact on children. Maybe people know of studies and they should send them to me. I'd love to see them and update my thinking about that. And I think it's important because a lot of the motivation for cash transfers is this child story. Where I think it matters if you give it to men or women is outcomes for men or women and women's empowerment and agency measures. But for children, I don't think there's evidence that it matters. And Now, the truth is most social protection, not public works, but cash transfers are targeting women anyway. Partly because of this notion that kids are better off, where we don't actually have evidence that's true. I don't know that that's a bad thing because the women do seem to be better off once they get the cash transfer. Public works is gateway jobs. I haven't seen much written about it. Most of the public works literature I've seen is sort of the immediate impacts of the public works opportunity. And then in the case of NREGA, which is very unique, it's things like general equilibrium effects, raising rural wage rates, and that kind of thing. So.
Great, thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.